And we're going to start off today with Senate Bill 605, Senator Lewis Young. And Senator Lewis Young, we're going to call up the two sponsor panelists, although they're both virtual. So before we go to sort of in-person testimony, et cetera, why don't you present your bill? We'll go to your two sponsor panel virtual witnesses, and then we'll go back to in-person, et cetera. So you've got time you need on Senate Bill 605.
It is now. So basically what this bill does is address an obstacle that Maryland residents who are living abroad are facing in terms of voting in state and local elections. People move overseas on a temporary basis for a variety of reasons. Could be the military, they could work for international organizations, or even what I would call an extended midlife sabbatical. And right now, you are permitted to vote in the last county that you resided in, where you were registered or eligible to be registered to vote. But you have to declare whether you intend to return or return is uncertain. Now, the differences between the two are very subtle, and most people don't realize they need to dig down to really understand what that means. If you say my return is uncertain, you can only vote in federal elections. But if you say, I intend to return, you can vote in federal, state, and local elections. About 32 other states have actually fixed this problem and now allow individuals who use the designation, my return is uncertain, to vote in state and local elections. You will hear from some panelists who are living abroad. This is really important to them. They're still connected to their Maryland communities through friends, family, neighbors, and they can stay very updated on state and local issues through social media and from news information they get. So one of the other things I want to mention as well is that those who have the status of my return is uncertain, they're also liable for U.S. income tax filing, and male citizens must register for selective service. So before you listen to the stories of some of the individuals who will be testifying from overseas and brought this issue to my attention, I urge you all to consider this obstacle and help re-enfranchise those individuals that are very concerned about their communities and want to remain engaged. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions for Senator Lewis Young?
Yeah.
Okay, Senator Augustine.
Thank you, Chair Feldman. I just want to get from my understanding, these folks lived in the state, did not register when they were living in the state, left the state, and now would like to register to vote in our state?
Not necessarily. And they fall into two categories. Either they lived here and they registered to vote and have a voting history, but moved overseas for an undetermined amount of time, or they were eligible to vote, but for some reason didn't register at the time.
Okay, so it's both. You have two things going on in this piece of legislation is what you're saying, right?
Right.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, additional questions for the sponsor? Okay, well, we've got several witnesses virtual, all signed up favorable. Let's go first to Elizabeth Landry, who is part of your sponsor panel, and she's signed up straight favorable. Okay, Ms. Landry, I see you've got 2 minutes.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you perfect.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Feldman, Vice Chair Kagan, and committee. My name is Elizabeth Landry. Thank you for allowing me to share my story. I voted in Frederick before leaving, and I'm joining today from Sweden to share my enthusiastic support for SB 605. I was born, raised, and received my nursing degree in Salisbury. Years later, love took me to Frederick. In 2018, my partner and I made the leap and we moved abroad for their work. In the 4 years since, I have learned many things, including an entirely new language and culture, and that I took my Maryland vote my vote in Maryland elections for granted. When I received my 2020 ballot, some races I was used to voting for were not there. No Board of Education, no statewide or county initiatives. I asked why this was and was distressed to learn that many Maryland voters abroad can only vote in federal offices. In 2022, I was only more devastated to not be able to vote for offices such as governor or county executive. While in Sweden, I am disenfranchised as a Marylander and US citizen to fully vote as I did while living in Frederick. Important decisions are made at the state and local levels on issues that impact me. For example, I am non-binary, and my next Maryland driver's license will be able to accurately reflect my gender thanks to legislation passed. Please vote yes for SB 605 so that my voice as a US citizen in our government is the same, whether I live around the corner or across an ocean. Thank you for your consideration and time.
Okay, thank you. Any question? Oh, she left. Did she depart us?
She just,
Okay. Okay, there you are. Any questions for the witness? Okay, seeing none, thank you. We're going to go next to our next sponsor panel witness, Jared Rauch. Signed up straight favorable. Mr. Rauch. There you are. You've got 2 minutes.
Thank you, Committee Chair Feldman. Committee members, my name is Jared Rauch, and I'm grateful to testify remotely from South Korea in support of SB 605. I currently serve as the Executive Director of Democrats Abroad, but putting partisan politics aside, I'm intimately familiar with how dozens of states manage to facilitate the voting process for their uniformed and overseas civilian voters. To myself and all involved with our electoral process, voters being out of sight should not mean that they are out of mind, or in this case, excluded from fully exercising their civic duty to vote. While the organization I represent is partisan, the work we do is nonpartisan. We facilitate the largest nonpartisan voter registration and ballot request effort through our website, votefromabroad.org, to ensure that every American living overseas can register to vote, request their absentee ballot, and get the assistance they may need in voting. Much of our voter registration outreach is nonpartisan to reach as many voters as humanly possible, because every single voter and their vote matters. You can take the Marylander out of the state, but you can't take the state out of the Marylander. SB 605 ensures that every Maryland voter living abroad receives a full ballot with federal, state, and local races so they can exercise their right to vote at all levels of their government. The future of their state and all decisions made to navigate that path are integral and consequential for each and every one of these voters. Many did not have a voice in the election of this General Assembly, but it is the responsibility of this body to grant that all Marylanders and their as U.S. citizens have that capability going forward. We urge a favorable report for SB 605, and I thank you for your time today. I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Any questions for Mr. Rauch? Okay, seeing none, we're going to next go to virtual straight favorable Hillary Ganick. Ms. Ganick. There you are. Okay, you've got 2 minutes.
Thank you. Chair Feldman and the members of the committee. For the record, I am Dr. Hillary Ganick. I vote in President Ferguson's own District 46. I am delighted to be able to speak remotely in support of Senate Bill 605 from here in Toronto today. I moved here in 2012 to pursue my PhD in rehabilitation science at the University of Toronto. While here, I met my husband, and last May I gave birth to our first child. My parents still live in Bethesda, where I grew up, but due to COVID and to my pregnancy, we've not been able to be back in over 3 years. And I very much look forward to sharing my hometown with my son and introducing my community there to him. Although I've been in Canada for over a decade, I am a Marylander. Having a voice in the ongoings of the country and our state is extremely important to me. I see it as a reflection of myself. Of the many issues considered by this assembly, education and healthcare are my biggest priorities. Regrettably, in the last few years, I've had to divorce myself from state level politics because being denied a voice during these crucial Maryland elections is too much of a disappointment. I have voted in primary, midterm, and general elections from Canada for many years. Receiving and completing my ballot is a point of pride, and I'm always sure to tell friends and family in Canada, the US, and elsewhere that I've voted. Unfortunately, as a Marylander abroad, I receive a federal-only ballot. Knowing that I am being blocked from participating in the ongoings of my own state makes me feel cut off from the place that I still call home. I would love to have the opportunity to vote at the state and local levels where the laws that truly govern day-to-day life are enacted. Today, I'm here in support of Senate Bill 605 because there is a light at the end of the tunnel for me as a Marylander and a US citizen living abroad. I respectfully request that this committee vote in favor of SB 605 so that I can finally resume having an equal voice in our state and local government. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Okay, any questions for the witness from Canada? An international panel we've got here. Okay, seeing none, and we're going to go to our final virtual witness, Candace. She's not present. Okay, now we're going to go to, got two in-person witnesses. Jean Benoff, why don't you come on up? You're sign up favorable with amendments, and you've got 2 minutes, and you can explain whatever amendment you want to put forward. Okay.
Yes.
Also.
All right, thank you. Like I said, Jean Maselli, thanks to each of you for this opportunity to speak, and thank you for your attention today to my suggestions. My vote, offer favorable support to this with amendment. Number one, referring to section 3502 D and E 1, lines 13 to 23. Addition of the following amendment is recommended to add that the election director shall itself verify that the voter has, as required by federal election law, to document in writing to the election director that this is the voter's first or any other election registration in another state or territory has been canceled in writing by this voter, thus preventing duplication. This will prevent duplication. Second amendment. If a person has moved from the US to another territory or country where they are residing for an extended period of time, how are they going to know how to cast an informed ballot for candidates, especially in particular to local elections? There should be some time limit to ensure that these voters still have some connection to the very jurisdictions in which they wish to cast the vote, or entitled to, as a matter of fact. Although national news is available globally, the information for a local election is much more limited when needing to make an informed vote for a county council member, sheriff, judge, or in particular, a school board member. Fact, the Maryland, this is very important. The Maryland Department of Health and Human Services sends a monthly list of persons who have died in Maryland only for the most recent month. Extremely important note to all of you. Any person who dies outside of Maryland, I'm wrapping up here, outside the continental United States or abroad, who does not get, the notice does not get to HHS, so it's not received or reported to the Maryland Health and Human Services, thus will never be reported to the Maryland Board of Elections, nor any of the 24 jurisdictions in our state. And I thank you all for your consideration.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for the witness?
Questions?
Okay,
No. All right,
thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Actually, our other virtual witness that had signed out is now back on. So we're going to go back to Candace Careston. There you are, and you've got 2 minutes. So signed up favorable.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate that. My name is Candace Carestan. I'm calling in today from Munich, Germany, and grateful to be testifying remotely. Currently serve as the state party chair of Democrats Abroad. We're one of the DNC's 57 state parties, and we're also the largest organization of U.S. citizens outside of the United States, representing millions of U.S. citizens living permanently or temporarily abroad, including many from Maryland. At the center of our mission is ensuring that U.S. citizens, regardless of their party affiliation, can and do exercise their constitutional right to vote. And that is why I'm asking you to please support Senate Bill 605, which would allow Maryland voters living abroad to receive the full ballot for federal, state, and local elections. Overseas voters, which include active duty military, military families, veterans, and civilians like myself, are guaranteed the right to vote in federal elections under current U.S. law. The majority of U.S. states afford all of their citizens abroad with the right to vote in state and local races. This is not the case in Maryland, however. In fact, on the substantial issues that this body is deliberating on today, many Maryland voters abroad do not have a voice. Senate Bill 605 would rectify this, ensuring that your citizens abroad can and do have a say in their representation at state and local levels. Specifically, the bill foresees that ballots issued to all Maryland voters include state and local races. Being able to vote in these races is a pillar to our democracy and both a responsibility and a privilege of being a U.S. citizen. As I recently traveled on the roads of Maryland en route to my home state of Pennsylvania, Governor Moore's name, along with the phrase, "leave no one behind," really stood out. In advocating for the voting rights of Marylanders living all around the world, I am asking you to not leave your overseas voters and their rights behind. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for the witness? Okay, seeing none. We do have one witness signed up unfavorable, Dana Schultz. Schultz, come on up. You're signed up unfavorable.
Thank you, Senators, for having me today. I'm a combat veteran and I hold a BS and a master's, and I oppose HB 0605, respectfully request that you vote against it. I fought, my friends died for our sacred right to vote in this constitutional republic. One legal citizen, one vote, the great equalizer. American citizens living overseas already are guaranteed the ability and path to vote. I personally experienced living overseas and voting. Election integrity is deeply distrusted, and HB 605 will deepen the distrust. Due to growing nonpartisan distrust in our election system, the identification of numerous apparent voting anomalies in the state of Maryland, and the documented issues pertaining to voting nationwide, over 60% of all Americans have lost faith in our elections. Polls continue to show that low voter confidence is nonpartisan and is not getting any better. Waiting for and instructing citizens to get over it will most likely never happen. To compound very low confidence, we are hearing more voters state they're not going to vote because they believe their vote doesn't matter. In fact, recent Rasmussen polls show the severity of the issue. Election integrity, 80% are concerned about election integrity. 75% are concerned about election cheating. And from a Board of Elections perspective, in the 2022 turnout, statistics were very disappointing. Even with all the accommodations of extending voting days and hours and a massive push for mail-in voting, turnout was 16.6% lower than the 2018 gubernatorial election. Clearly, these accommodations are not inspiring more Marylanders to make their voice heard via voting. In my opinion, it's a lack of trust in the voting system, and it's a significant factor driving these results. Increasing ballot access is not inspiring more Marylanders to vote. I do support the friendly amendments presented by Jean Benhoff. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Ms. Schultz? Nope, stay there. Wait, hold on a second. You got to field questions now. Senator Brooks.
Yes, Dana, quick question. The statistics that you cited, what was the source of that information?
So the Rasmussen poll is in my written testimony that I submitted. And there's also
Oh, I see the links.
links to the Anne Arundel County, showing the bipartisan statewide turnout in Anne Arundel County specifically.
And you said over 60% of Americans have lost faith in the election. And those percentages were from the same poll, I guess.
I see that that first quote is different than the 80%. Maybe it's a different date.
Okay. I see. Okay, I always thought the problem was voter apathy instead of voter.
I think that's
fraud.
also a problem because the Republican turnout decreased the least, even with overwhelming mail-in ballot by Democrats. Total Republican turnout exceeded Democrat turnout. So it's a bipartisan issue, a mistrust in our election systems.
All right, thanks. Thanks,
Okay,
Chair.
Senator Lewis Young.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make sure that you understand that the particular population that this is geared to already has the right to vote in United States elections. It's just because they checked the box, return uncertain, that they can only vote in federal, but not state and local elections. It didn't seem that that was clear from your testimony. Is that clear?
Yes, I do understand that.
Okay.
Thank you for pointing that out. I was reading it as I was sitting there, and it's another avenue of widening the expanse of voting access, and it's not providing more security in what we see as our elections.
Okay, any additional
Thank you.
questions for the witness? Okay, seeing none, that concludes bill hearing on Senate Bill 605. I see Senator Folden right in front of me. And once you come up to stand on Senate Bill 750. And there's only one other witness that actually signed up favorable for your bill. It is Ms. Schultz again. Can I just bring her up? Those are the only,
Sure.
you and her are the only. Ms. Schultz, you want to come back up? This is Senate Bill 750 and you signed up favorable on this piece of legislation. So Senator Folden, take the time you need to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Senator William Folden, District 4, Frederick County. On Senate Bill 750, the election law voting proof of identity. This bill is simply asking for us to verify what we all already hold very near and dear to our hearts, which is that being from this country, the foundation of our country, being a military veteran myself, continuing to serve our community, that we have integrity in our elections, that we have the disclosure necessary to ensure that we're having these fair and impartial elections. And that's the root of what our country is founded on. Our country is founded on that ideal of free elections and elections by the citizens of this country. We cannot continue to expand and allow the overflow and that we're accepting in our country and continue to expect that we'll remain buoyant. It doesn't happen that way. We all stand the opportunity of being overrun by those that would prey upon those less vulnerable. And for that, I moved forward with this bill, and it's a really simple bill. The only thing it asks is that someone coming to vote, that they should be able to provide a government issued photo identification that includes their signature. And then they have a wet signature upon receiving their ballot. I think this is a very common sense approach to facilitating community trust back into the election process and creating the buy-in that we need moving forward, as we have those that would obviously, like I said, prey upon our country and try to change the direction in which we head. So with that, I would ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Any questions of Senator Folden? Senator Lewis Young, your light's on. Is
Oh,
that
sorry.
the same? Okay, any additional questions for the sponsor? Thank you, sir. We are going to bring up Ms. Schultz again, Dana Schultz. Sign up straight favorable. And you've got 2 minutes again.
My testimony is much the same, and I had another study that I wanted to submit, which I'm not sure I submitted the right testimony. I'm sorry. Marylanders want to make it easy to vote, but hard to cheat. We want a free, fair, and trustworthy process. The lies are obvious. For the people, ballot harvesting. Sorry, trying to adjust my testimony. Voter ID requirements are wildly popular, supported across demographic groups, including Black Americans. Abiding popularity aside, forcibly replacing voter ID requirements with a mere declaration of identity destroy all trust in our electoral process. So the voter ID laws that I'm citing here are popular. Democrats' position on voter fraud is that we don't need to strengthen and secure our elections simply because voter fraud hasn't led to a major national election being decided incorrectly so far. A convenience store that has never been robbed shouldn't lock its doors when it closes nor set its alarm. These are just some of the public policy outcomes that would follow from this line of reasoning, yet its underlying arguments informing the modern left's attack on measures that would help strengthen and secure elections. Securing elections isn't a partisan or racist issue. Policymakers need to be working together at the state and local and federal levels to safeguard our elections with common sense measures that work. So I apologize that my testimony wasn't well put together, but voter ID is going to instill more voter confidence in our elections, basically. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Any questions for the witness? Okay, thank you. That concludes bill hearing on Senate Bill 750. We're going to next turn to Senator Watson, Senate Bill 886.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, colleagues. Senate Bill 886 is a very, very simple bill. This bill expands the circumstance under which surviving spouses of members of the U.S. Armed Services are eligible to apply for the Edward T. Conroy Memorial Scholarship Program. Currently under the bill, only sons, daughters, stepsons, and stepdaughters have access to this scholarship. This bill would allow surviving spouse, make them eligible if the surviving member died as a result of military service after December 7th, 1941, was declared to be a prisoner of war or missing in action as a result of the Vietnam conflict. As under current law, the surviving spouse of a service member who suffered a service-connected 100% permanent disability continues to be eligible regardless of the date of disability. The fiscal note on this is minimal, as the number of surviving spouses or service members who were declared prisoner of war or missing in action as a result of Vietnam conflict are assumed to be very minimal given their likely ages. Some of you will remember that Edward T. Conroy was a former senator who represented my district and then succeeded by his wife, Mary T. Conroy. And so I ask for acceptance of this bill and ask for your favorable report.
Okay, thank you, Senator Watson. Any questions for the sponsor, Senator Watson? Okay, seeing none, that concludes bill hearing on Senate Bill 886. We're going to next move to Senator Hester, Senate Bill 799.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a panel. Is that okay?
Absolutely. I see Laura Nelson here.
So-
Is she your?
She is my panel.
Okay, that's your panel.
Thank you, Chair Feldman, Vice Chair Kagan, members of the committee, for your consideration of Senate Bill 162. For those of you who were here last year, you'll probably remember this bill. It's slimmed down and tightened up, and I think this year it's really ready to pass. The bill simply directs the Department of Education to develop a cyber safety guide in consultation with the Maryland Department of Health and professionals who specialize in child development and child psychology. The guide will include information and best practices promoting responsible internet online use through the prevention and management of several factors. This includes cyberbullying, content depicting or encouraging self-harm, hate speech and graphic content, identity theft, cybersecurity threats, dissemination of false information, and negative impacts of social media and technology usage. The guide will then be posted on the Maryland State Department of Education website and also sent to the local boards of education for their use if they wish to. I'd like to just point out straight away that this is not a curriculum mandate. It's simply asking the State Department of the State Department of Education to pull together the relevant stakeholders to get the research into a guide format so that it can be valuably used by our local school systems should they so choose. So why should you vote for this bill, colleagues? While the correlation between the complex links between mental health and social media usage, the correlation does not always mean causation, but it's very, very complicated. And the more and more time our kids spend online, the importance is that they know how to act, how to take simple steps early in their online life. But this requires best practices and a concerted effort on the parts of all of us, parents, teachers, and students, to really take this as the public health issue that it is. So I think this is important to our constituents, to our parents, to our teachers, and to our students who are attempting to balance the demands of an increasing digital world with their own mental and behavioral well-being. I'd like to point out that there's a couple amendments that I will be taking on. The first comes from the department, and they have asked to lead the work group so that they will chair it. The second is that I thought there were some really good points made in the Howard County Board of Ed testimony that asked that it be linked to relative to scientific research and updated periodically because this field is growing so fast. I think that's a really good addition. And I'd like to close by saying that the Maryland Association of the Boards of Education also support this bill. And so with that, I will ask for a favorable report on Senate Bill 162 and turn it over to Laura Nelson.
Okay, Ms. Nelson, you've got 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Feldman and committee members, and for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Laura Nelson. I'm the President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Cryptologic Foundation. One of our primary tenets of our mission is to educate and engage our citizens to be cyber smart individuals and to develop pathways for future cyber workforce. I'm here today to support Senate Bill 799. Every day, our youth are at risk as they enter the digital ecosystem. The development of a cyber safety guide and training will equip today's students to better understand the interconnected world around us. Let's begin with the phone. Every time the youth wakes up until they go to bed, the phone is collecting data about their sleep habits, clothes, sense of humor, musical tastes, everything about them. Companies and criminals have a voracious appetite for information. Besides name, number, and email, they're also collecting age and geographical information. As we know, it's about the money. We need our youth to understand what we call the big ideas of cybersecurity. Data security, how we protect our data. Our youth need to understand authentication, proving that you are and who you are, and authorization, what you're allowed to see and do once you have that. Establishing trust. How do we know if a website is safe? We use the term data care about how we protect our own data. Risk. How do we assess risk? This involves the vulnerability of a security system, understanding the threat or bad guys, and how to defend yourself from attack. This guide will also promote good decision-making and responsible internet use. Equipping our youth with this basic information will help them to become savvy citizens of the digital ecosystem and provide them with tools and guidance for safe internet, social media, and technology use. They need to understand how to best protect themselves and assure their privacy and security. I urge you to vote favorably. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for the sponsor, Senator Hester or Ms. Nelson? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the bill hearing on Senate Bill 799. Next turn to Senate Bill 905. This bill is under my name, but essentially came at the request of the Public Service Commission. So I'm just going to call up Lisa Smith and Molly Knoll. And I think Molly, I think you're going to take the lead and then we'll take it from there. So those from the Public Service Commission. And Mr. Baker as well. So 3 of you, and start with you, Ms. Knoll. Is that how you want it? Okay.
Good afternoon, Chair Feldman and committee members. My name is Molly Knoll, and I'm a senior commission advisor with the Maryland Public Service Commission. The Empower program for 14 years has provided a lot of benefits to Maryland ratepayers. For every dollar that's paid into this program, ratepayers have received between $1.50 and $2 in benefits. And those benefits are in reduced distribution bills, reduced energy bills, and other benefits that customers receive through participation in the program. 2 years ago, the commission foresaw the end of the lighting programs as having a significant impact on the future of these programs. And the commission instituted a work group process. There were more than 30 members in that work group process. It included utilities, ratepayer, low income, and environmental advocates, as well as state agencies. That work group developed 3 recommendations, which are executed in SB 905. The first is that the energy efficiency programs should immediately transition to greenhouse gas reduction programs. Second, both electric and gas utilities should be required to offer these programs. And third, the Department of Housing and Community Development should continue to offer low-income programs, and a goal should be set for those programs. In the absence of legislation this year, program costs will be increasing just to achieve the energy efficiency that we've previously achieved. The Empower program is a surcharge. It is a line item on everyone's bill, and that line item occurs based on volumetric usage. So the more you use, the more you pay. The CSNA made clear last year that climate change is the highest priority for the state right now. It is no longer energy efficiency. If greenhouse gas reductions are our highest priority, then the successful Empower program architecture and processes can be used to serve that goal. Energy efficiency right now goes through cost effectiveness testing. It goes through semi-annual reviews with the commission. It goes through stakeholder comments, and we can do all of that for greenhouse gas reductions, the same as we currently do for energy efficiency. At this time, the commission is currently working towards setting greenhouse gas reduction goals, but under current statute, those goals would be secondary to the energy efficiency that's in statute. Transitioning now to primary greenhouse gas reductions would allow us to use the dollars that ratepayers are paying most effectively for that priority. The commission has required a potential study from the utilities. We have received stakeholder comment on that potential study. We've had a hearing on that study, and the commission will be issuing an order in the near future that will require the utilities to come in before the end of this year with all the information the commission will need to set greenhouse gas reduction goals, while looking both at program design, costs, and ratepayer impacts. With all of that information available, the commission will be able to set goals that make sure that we're best using these dollars that come from our constituents and that achieve precisely what the state has stated to be the goal in the CSNA. In the absence of this bill, we will spend a lot of money and we will not have cost containment controls in order to make sure that we're achieving precisely what we need going forward. So I would urge the passage of SB 905 so that the commission can ensure that this successful program continues to provide exactly the benefits that are needed today.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Smith, are you going to testify as well?
Chair Feldman,
Yeah.
thank you. You're so generous with your time. I believe Molly Knoll has covered most of our main points, and we can be here for questions if that's all right with you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Mr. Baker, is that the same with you? You're here for
Same.
questions?
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, well, then open it up to questions from the committee. Any of the 3 panelists? Senator Brooks.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Ms. Knoll, you said empowers volumetric. Now, isn't it based on the first certain amount of therms with gas and a certain amount of say usage with electricity?
I believe it's a pure volumetric rate. So for every either therm or kilowatt that you use, there's a certain amount that's added to the bill.
Yeah, okay, but it's like, I thought for gas was on the first 57 therms, you pay on that.
There's no limit. So the more you use, the more you will pay. There's no cap on if you use X amount of energy, you only pay up to this amount. So currently we don't have a cap on how much you would pay into Empower depending upon your usage, if that's your question, Senator.
Well, yeah, I was thinking like say if I used say 200 therms the first month, but that on gas, that first 57 therms, that's what the empowerment surcharge would be on, right?
The Empower surcharge would be on all 200 therms.
On all 200. Oh,
yes.
Okay.
Correct.
Oh, okay. All right.
No. Yeah,
That is-
57 therms is typically what we might say is the average usage of a customer, like our average residential customer throughout an entire year. But when we charge customers, we charge them for their entire usage for the Empower surcharge.
The volumetric.
Yes.
And bear in mind that average usage in gas is really misleading because there's almost never an average usage month because the majority of gas is consumed in the winter and then summer months are much lower.
I see. All right. Thanks. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, we'll go Senator Hester, then Senator Watson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So I'm still trying to understand the Empower budget. And I understand that utilities haven't spent the full budget in recent years. And so I'm just curious what, what's happening and, whether you think that maybe the PSC should establish a system of incentives and penalties in some way.
So the way the Empower budgets work is a program plan is brought in at the beginning of the 3-year cycle. It includes what will be accomplished and what will be spent over the course of the next 3 years. Semi-annually, the commission reviews whether or not the benefits are being delivered, the money is being spent. The surcharge is only based on what is spent. If the utility does not spend the money, they do not collect the money, and it is trued up to ensure that ratepayers never pay for something that they're not receiving. On the issue of cost recovery, the commission has recently been looking, well, for years, they have been examining this issue, and they've acted more recently to begin to reduce the amortized balance in the surcharge. And the commission has also signaled interest in looking at performance incentive metrics. And the expectation is that there will be performance incentive metrics in the next plan filing that will then align the utility incentives with ratepayer interests.
Okay, we'll go to Senator Watson, then to Senator Augustine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thought I heard you just say that through the Empower program, funds are collected, but some may not be spent. Did I hear you say that?
No, sir. If funds, if the budgets are not spent, then the amounts are not collected. The utilities only collect what they are actually spending to the benefit of ratepayers. If additional money is collected, it is then returned to customers through a true-up mechanism.
Yes, one additional question. Are the utilities guaranteed a profit from these programs?
So stop me if I go too far here, but under the regulatory paradigm, if the utilities use money to benefit customers, they are legally and constitutionally entitled to a return on that money. So because our utilities are doing these and we're paying them back over a 5-year time period, and that decision was made by the commission 14 years ago, because the money is outstanding on an average 2.5 years, we do pay interest for 2.5 years. And the commission again has taken recent action to start going to an expense model where we will no longer pay interest for 2.5 years. We will simply be paying for the programs as they run.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, Senator Augustine.
Thank you. So since you are contemplating a change to greenhouse gas instead of energy efficiency, and of course, there was an incentive for folks to use less energy and therefore pay less Empower tax. How does that work when you're no longer measuring efficiency?
So when Empower was enacted, reliability was the biggest kind of issue that the state was facing, the electric grid. And so reducing usage was exactly what we needed. With deep decarbonization, the only potentially carbon-free energy source that we have is electricity. So we need to electrify vehicles, we need to electrify home heating, we need to actually increase electricity consumption at the same time as we're deploying renewables in order to reduce greenhouse gases. And so we won't have energy efficiency for its own sake any longer. We will have energy efficiency for the sake of using and consuming less energy as a resource. But in fact, the intention of deep decarbonization is that electricity consumption will go up. And Empower has been very successful. We've reduced from about 1,000 average kilowatts per month to 850. So there's some space to have that increase as the grid gets ready for deeper decarbonization.
You just didn't answer my question though, right? Which is mine is a very fundamental question in this way. It seems to me that what you're really saying is that Empower has actually run its course. And now you're trying to put a square peg into a round hole with regard to greenhouse gas, which is entirely different. And I'm supportive of us doing that, but that is simply not the design of the Empower program, which was designed on both sides in order to encourage energy efficiency. And so what I asked was, since it's no longer going to do that, how does it even get designed with exactly what you just said? which is you're no longer you're looking at reduction of greenhouse gas emissions through one mechanism to do that is electrification. I would suggest that efficiency remains a tool for that as well, but you're trying to move away from that. I'm just trying to understand how the design, it seemed to me it would still remain very unfair, by the way, if the design remained the same, but you've changed what you're actually trying to accomplish.
So you're right. I did misunderstand your question and I apologize. Energy efficiency is one way to achieve decarbonization, and the bill includes energy efficiency, conservation, and beneficial electrification. The way the commission is looking at Empower is it is a program architecture and infrastructure. So we have existing work groups, we have folks who work within the utilities, we have cost effectiveness testing, we have evaluation, measurement, and verification. And all of those tools can serve energy efficiency or they can serve greenhouse gas reduction. And so what that means is we have all of the pieces in place to analyze whether or not the utilities are going to be able to do what they promise and whether or not they're going to be able to deliver what they promised. And so all of those pieces of the Empower program can serve anything that we ask in this space. But right now, greenhouse gas reduction is what we're looking to have them deliver.
Okay, Mr. Trapp, last one. Okay.
It's important.
So you collect the money, or rather, given the current construct, right? You collect the money and you give the money then to, or rather the utility collects the money, however you end up with the design of the program. The utility collects the money. There's no longer really a connection for the ratepayer really to their actions, which of course in the Empower program, there is a connection that they have. They are a part of the solution. Have you contemplated that? Like the fact that it's no longer going to be the case when you may be making transfers to a different, to something that has less greenhouse gas impact, but may in fact be an increase on the electricity side, and you're still going to get charged more when you're doing that? How does that make sense?
That is an excellent question. Do you want to take a step?
Right. So thank you, Senator. The energy efficiency is still going to be a key component of the Empower program. I think that that's not coming through. It's still a very important part of it because every electron avoided means that we're having to procure less electricity, build less infrastructure. So therefore, we're still getting the energy efficiency benefits of within the Empower programs, but we're changing the target towards GHGs. In terms of benefits towards how a customer can directly benefit from using this program, if they take advantage of the offerings within the program that we're going to be constructing, then yes, our consumers will get that benefit. And those who don't, the theory would be the societal benefits of us avoiding greenhouse gases. And that's, I understand that's the debate around this stuff, is the societal benefits of avoiding that would be better than the greenhouse gas occurring. And so those who would directly benefit from these programs are going to be those who take advantage of the program offerings, similar to how it would happen today in Empower, which is those who get the most benefits from Empower are those who choose to use the offerings. There are theoretically secondary benefits to other consumers, and we would want I should point out that the bill is still envisioning cost effectiveness. So overall, for us to approve a program, we need to see mathematically from our experts and the parties that this is going to deliver benefits greater than the cost of the program. And so, but yes, I think I understand your point, which is we can see that dropping in electricity that's a very direct correlation. That visibility, that line of sight is a little more hazy if you go for greenhouse gases. But if the intention of if the policy of this state is to decarbonize, one of our challenges is going to be the fact that we will end up using more electricity, but can we do it in a proper and efficient way of getting there? But the Empower and energy efficiency are still an important tool that would be a part of this program as a direct benefit to customers.
And I want to add one point. I think what you might be asking is whether or not ratepayers should be paying for this as opposed to some other stream of revenues. If we're fixing a societal problem, which is greenhouse gases, should that be paid for by energy usage, which is a very regressive way to collect money?
So that's how I feel about the regressive nature of the program. There's no question. And we do have other tools. It's not that I don't think that we need to use other tools. It's just a question of whether or not this now becomes, to me, potentially even more potentially regressive when it's even more difficult to really draw the connection to the ratepayer by virtue of the complication of what you are contemplating. And so that is where I am absolutely, what I'm thinking about. So thank you.
Yes, and I will say that I share that concern, but the recommendation of the work group was to transition from EE to greenhouse gases. And we have had stakeholders in front of us arguing that there should be other funding sources here. Unfortunately, the commission doesn't have any other funding sources at its disposal.
But we would not oppose general funds for that purpose. To your point, Senator, that's been clear in the record. So thank you for raising that really great point.
Okay, good line of questioning there. Senator Hester.
Thank you very much, and I'll be brief. You mentioned the work group. And, I guess it would be, first of all, it'd be great to know if there was a consensus list of recommendations that came from the work group. And then because we've got several bills in front of us that deal with Empower, I'm wondering if everything in this bill is a consensus recommendation from the work group, or if there are things in this bill that did not emerge from the working group process. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator. I believe Molly mentioned the three factors. She can repeat them again. The three items. I do understand the chair has amendments to Senate Bill 905. There were some drafting issues, and I think other amendments are being contemplated to streamline this, and therefore we will have a much simpler task here, hopefully, and there will be, I suspect it will reflect consensus because it'll be much less than what was in the original bill. And did you want to go over the three things again?
So the 30 plus members, diverse interests, you're not going to have full consensus. So the areas that are in the bill are the parts where everyone could agree. There were some folks who wanted more, there were some folks who wanted other things, but what we put in the bill were the three key recommendations: energy efficiency to greenhouse gas reductions, that the electric and gas utilities should both be required to have programs, and that DHCD be included in the statute and have low income goals set for serving that population. Absolutely. And the commission also filed a report over the summer with the legislature. I can make sure you get a copy of both of those.
Okay, any additional questions for the Public Service Commission panel? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to call up another panel of a mix of favorables and favorable with amendment witnesses. Manuel Geraldo from Washington Gas, and there you are, sir. Emily Scarr, Carville Collins, so I see Carville back there, Josh Tolkien, Josh back there, and let's take this fine. Katie Nash back there. Why don't you come up here, Katie, and that'll be the panel, and then we've got basically just a few more witnesses after this. So, okay, Carville, you've got that mic right in front of you. Why don't you lead off, and then we'll take it. Right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Carville Collins, representing Columbia Gas of Maryland, which serves some 33,000 natural gas customers in Maryland's three westernmost counties. We're here in support of Senate Bill 905 with amendments. The goals of the legislation are reasonable and measured, and Columbia is firmly committed to these goals. While supporting the intent of the bill, we offer three minor amendments. The first two would afford first-time filers, and we would be one of those, just slightly more time to complete our first consultation with the commission and the submission of our first plan. The commission mentioned plans or information to be provided by the end of the year. We would certainly meet that deadline. We just need a little more time because we're a first-time filer. The third amendment clarifies an important issue, we think, that the plans that each of the companies would implement would achieve overall cost effectiveness. It is our considered view that these plans proposed to the commission must be realistic and they must not adversely impact ratepayers. In other words, the costs of the plans to ratepayers under this legislation should not exceed the benefits to ratepayers. If costs exceed benefits, we submit this is not a good outcome for ratepayers. And further, it's an especially problematic and regressive outcome for low and middle income ratepayers. Cost effectiveness is essential, and it's a main reason for our support of this bill with amendment, while Columbia is opposing the other Empower bill before you, Senate Bill 689, which is silent not only on the cost effectiveness, but on any other criteria for these plans. And finally, Mr. Chairman, I'll wrap up just to say that this bill, Senate Bill 905, it also permits us to produce meaningful efficiencies and emission reductions from new technologies such as renewable natural gas and hydrogen, whereas Senate Bill 689, the other bill, does not. For those reasons, we support this bill with amendments. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Aldo, you're right in front and your side up favorable. I probably should have called you first. So why don't you go next? You've got 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, members of the committee. Manny Giraldo here representing Washington Gas. The committee has our written testimony, so I'll be very brief. We support Senate Bill 905. We support efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions across the state of Maryland. And we urge the committee to vote favorably. Thank you.
Okay, why don't you pass that to Mr. Tolkien right to your right, and then we'll.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Josh Tolkien on behalf of the Maryland chapter of the Sierra Club. We urge a favorable report with amendments. The Sierra Club was part of the work group that was mentioned, and as is noted in our testimony and from others, we do believe that there are items in this bill which don't reflect the consensus, but more importantly, that we never asked that recommendations from the Public Service Commission should be based on consensus, nor do we think that is a reasonable approach to public policy. When you have the environmentalists, the Office of People's Counsel, and the utilities in one room, we're going to agree on some stuff, but that's not actually the measure of public policy. It certainly is not how this body operates. And in that sense, I want to reiterate several recommendations that we have, which are delineated in our written testimony. First, we do recommend that the General Assembly set a goal for the Empower program. There are too many variables to simply leave this goal to the Public Service Commission, even with a cost effectiveness test, saying that this goal will be based on the state's goal of a 60% reduction in greenhouse gases is simply not enough guidance for people to participate. I'll also note that currently the advocates such as the Sierra Club are not part of the process per this bill. We do recommend that critical ratepayer protections be put in place per Senator Augustine's comments. We believe that an 85% behind the meter savings will, as well as a cost effectiveness test, will ensure that energy efficiency and cost savings become central and remain central to the way that the program operates. We outlined several other amendments that we think center ratepayer savings as the central aspect of the Empower program, and would refer people to our written testimony. Thank you very much for your time.
Good.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And then we'll go to Ms. Nash last. Okay. Yeah.
Emily Scarr with Maryland PIRG here with recommended amendments to SB 905. Maryland PIRG has worked on consumer issues in the state for 50 years, including helping with the initial Empower Energy Efficiency Act. While we do support the shift to greenhouse gases as a metric for the energy efficiency program, we share the concerns that Senator Augustine raised about making sure that the consumer guardrails are put in place so the program stays true to its goal as an in-home energy efficiency program where people save more by using less energy. We're concerned that as drafted, the legislation fails to ensure these consumer protections and lacks sufficient detail on how utilities plan to meet their greenhouse gas goals. Since Empower works on a 3-year planning cycle, it is important that we pass legislation this year to guide a shift to greenhouse gas emissions. My testimony has a lot of details and amendments we're recommending, but just to highlight a few, SB 905 includes a provision that guarantees that utilities profit on the program, which is a shift from current statute.
Maryland utilities are profiting significantly more on their energy efficiency program than other top states. We're not opposed to them profiting, but we do think it should be contingent on performance. The bill will reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but it's unclear where those will come from. In an op-ed in Maryland Matters, the chair of the PSC said he's excited for this bill to expand the program to include electric vehicles. Now, I love electric vehicles, but I don't think ratepayer Empower funds should be used for vehicle electrification. They should be used for in-home energy efficiency improvements. And then finally, we agree with, as Josh mentioned, we need to lay out a specific goal for greenhouse gas emission reductions, at the very least codifying that it's in line with the Climate Solutions Now Act. For those reasons, we respectfully request amendments to the bill.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Nash, you get the plate cleanup here.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Katie Nash, on behalf of Vistra, in support with amendments for SB 905. We submit written testimony, so I will be brief. We include in that testimony an amendment specifically contemplating adding suppliers to the work of this programming. And the bill contemplates that DHCD can procure or provide programs. And so we have some ideas about how competition could bring additional programs to the offerings. As we move forward with our goals, I do applaud this committee with your work to balance the costs to ratepayers. Permitting new market participants and innovative products will provide the opportunities we need to broaden out the state's programming. The legislation, as I said, does procure or provide programs. So just that slight edit will let us participate. Thank you very much. And I urge favorable with amendments on SB 905.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Nash. Any questions for any of the panel? Senator Hester.
Thank you very much. I just want to ask my previous question about the work group and the consensus things. Mr. Tolkien, did you say that there are things in this bill that were not discussed at the work group?
Yeah, thank you for the question. There are several elements in the bill that were not part of the consensus outcomes. There's at least two provisions I can speak to. One is there's language currently in Empower that says that the PSC may provide certain financial incentives to the utilities, and this language changes it to shall provide, which essentially would require that. There's additional language, and I'd have to pull up it exactly, that says that the utilities would be able to receive, I believe it's their standard rate of return, I think the language is, which is also not currently, is not in current law and was not, to the best of my recollection, part of the discussion work group. I also think that the work group did not discuss, I don't recall it discussing removing any of the cost effectiveness tests.
Okay, any additional questions for any of the panel? Okay, seeing none. We're going to go next to our Office of People's Counsel, David Lapp. Mr. Lapp, I see you back there. Why don't you come on up here, and you've got 2 minutes. And you're signed up favorable with an amendment with amendments.
Good afternoon, Chair Feldman, members of the committee. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. David Lapp on behalf of the Office of People's Counsel. I will just say that we're supporting this with, we have in our written testimony a number of, we think, very important amendments. And we agree with some of the comments that have just been made that this bill does not reflect a consensus of the working group. And those reasons are explained in our written testimony. I want to follow up on the point that was just addressed from Senator Hester, and that is language in the bill that says that the Empower cost from utilities can be recovered in rate base at the utilities authorized rate of return. That is a significant deviation from current law, and it's also inconsistent with a commission order, a 4-1 decision from the commission December 29th, 2022, which says that moving from an expensing model, which is where the commission is now headed, to a full expensing model, it would result in a, quote, dramatic increase in rates, end quote. And then it says it further, it would embed, quote, embed the Empower program in base rates by eliminating the Empower Maryland surcharge line item on customer bills And that would effectively hide the cost and presence of the program in distribution rates to the benefit of no one. And that is from a commission order just prior to the session starting. Yet language in this bill would have the utilities give them the ability to recover Empower cost in rate base. And that is also separate from the shall receive incentives. So that language is in addition to the problem with the incentive language. Thank you.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Lapp? Senator Augustine.
Yeah, I just want to give, I'm not sure, you may have some more that you want to share because you addressed the one thing, but were there other things that you wanted to share? Because I know you work really hard in this space.
Yeah, we think the working group wanted to have some specifics on behind the meter, front of the meter. Now, specific numbers weren't agreed upon. Staff said 80% behind the meter. We said 85. Some of the other groups, we think there should be in legislation a specific target. We would like to see 85. We could live with 80, but we think there should be a target. We also think there should be a target for greenhouse gas reductions. The consensus was to replace the existing energy savings targets with greenhouse gas reductions targets. This does not do that. It doesn't have a replacement. It just says turn it over to the commission. The bill also removes some of the cost effectiveness language that's in current law. So we want to make sure that's retained. It does point to the Maryland specific test, which we support. So those are a few of the other points.
Okay, any additional questions, Mr. Lapp? Okay, thank you, sir. We've got just two additional witnesses. See Ms. Schultz there, Dana Schultz, you've signed up unfavorable. And then we have one witness signed up for information purpose only. So we'll take you first, signed up unfavorable, Ms. Schultz, 2 minutes.
Yes, I'm still Dana Schultz, for the record, a combat veteran. I hold a bachelor's and a master's. I'm here to testify on behalf of Common Sense Marylanders. Balanced energy policies must provide Marylanders multiple, reliable, affordable energy choices, not expensive energy controlled by the government. So I submitted written testimony. And I just want to say that there is not a climate crisis. There are climate alarmists. And they have been proven wrong by science observation over and over. In 1966, they predicted, the climate alarmists predicted, the oil will be completely gone in 10 years. In 1976, so 1966 came and then they changed it to 1976. We still have plenty of oil. And there are many, many more examples of these climate alarmists. Marylanders want equal opportunities to produce and consume energy without the government deciding for us the expensive fuels that Marylanders can't afford these options. CO2 is a trace gas essential to life. Without CO2, we don't have plants, we don't have animals, we don't have humans. This climate crisis is created by the climate alarmists and the war on energy. America produces the cleanest energy in the world. Let Marylanders have free access to our energy. Thank you.
Questions for Ms. Schultz? Okay, seeing none, thank you. Jim Gravatt, is Mr. Gravatt here?
I am, thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you're virtual. Thank you, sir. And you've got 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, senators, for the opportunity to be here. My name is Jim Gravatt, for the record. I was invited by Mr. Tolkien of the Sierra Club, and I've been involved in Empower proceedings on behalf of the Maryland Energy Efficiency Advocates for over a decade. And I participated in, I think, pretty much every single meeting of the Future Programming Work Group over the last 2 years. And I just want to share some information about what I think is missing in SB 905. And as has been mentioned, first of all, it seems to supersede the previously enacted statutory goals from last year on electric energy efficiency. I do want to mention that in my experience, and as been borne out by research, states that have statutory savings goals save a lot more energy than states that do not have them, on the order of 4 times. And I think that is likely to be true for greenhouse gas abatement as well. I also want to mention that the potential study that was authorized by the Commission found that most of the greenhouse gas abatement that is available to homes and businesses in the state will come from energy efficiency, electric energy efficiency, and also a fair amount from beneficial electrification as well. But in this bill, the Commission decides what's inbounds and what's not. So I'm concerned that there are not adequate protections to make sure that the benefits will flow directly to homes and businesses, to the ratepayers, in fact, who are paying for them. I also want to say that I think with electrification, it's really important for all of this to look at the long-term costs, because there's a lot of concern in this industry that as people electrify, gas is going to become much more expensive. And so when we're looking at short-term costs, it may or may not be advantageous. But I think to have a bill that focuses or allows significant electrification with an emphasis also on ensuring that flows to low-income households as well is really important, so they are not left paying for a gas system in the future after everybody else has left. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I should have mentioned at the outset, you signed up purely for information purposes. Any
Indeed.
questions for the witness, Mr. Gravatt? Okay, seeing none, that concludes bill hearing on Senate Bill 905. It's almost we teed it up. The next bill will be 522. Senator Hershey. I know you were listening to that with intense
Yes.
interest. That's sort of up your alley.
Tidbits of information there.
Okay, so we're on Senate Bill 522, and we've got Senator Hershey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Senator Hershey to present Senate Bill 522, which is a very simple bill. It simply changes the membership of the Accountability and Implementation Board by adding 4 members. So it goes from 7 members to 11 members. But it requires that there must be a member from Western Maryland, a member from Southern Maryland, a member from the Eastern Shore, and then 1 member from each of the 5 jurisdictions with the largest student population. So this bill doesn't change any of the process on how these members are nominated and go through the Senate with advice and consent. It remains the priority of the or prerogative of the governor to select from members that are presented to him. But if you can remember last year, there was a number of conversations about how the 7 members were selected as they had to go through executive nominations. And there were only 9 members from 43 applications that were selected for the first round of the AIB board members. That was narrowed down to 7 members by Governor Hogan. And of those 7 members, 3 lived in Montgomery County, 2 lived in Baltimore City, 1 lived in Anne Arundel County, and 1 lived in Baltimore County. So all of the members came from the central part of the state. And there was a lot of floor debate that came about as a result of that. There was also, if you remember, opposition that came from the Prince George's County Executive on that, and also came from the Legislative Latino Caucus that felt that they were not adequately represented in this very important board. So I want to make sure that we have the best representation possible, again, going from 7 members to 11 members, of which only of those 11 members, 8 would be required to have some type of a geographic requirement. The other 3 members do not have to have any type of geographic representation. As you also know, that there is a current vacancy on the AIB. The governor's chief of staff was an initial board member there. Obviously, he has decided to be the chief of staff and had to resign as a result of that. So we're going to see that process in action. There was applications were being accepted until 8 o'clock on February 24th. So we'll see the new member be selected from that. I would imagine to say, based on who the opposition was last year, we would probably see a Latino individual from Prince George's County. I would hope that we would find a way to start seeing some individuals from rural counties, as we have our own challenges that are very different from what I would think board members that are located in the central part of the state have seen. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I think that this is, again, a very important piece of legislation. I'll add one thing as well, too. If you remember during the debates, when the original 9 applicants were originally selected, the Senate president did send a note to the nominations committee, or send a letter to the nominations committee. And one of the comments that he had written in that, although it is impossible for a 7-member board to be fully representative of the 24 jurisdictions and the diversity of all Maryland residents, the confusion sowed by letters the nominating committee has received around representation creates unnecessary doubt in the process. And I think that's where we still are, that there's still doubt that these 7 members who represent only a very confined area of the state of Maryland are able to adequately represent the needs of all schools from all 24 jurisdictions across the state. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would ask for a favorable vote on Senate Bill 552.
Okay, thank you, Senator Hershey. Senator Carrozza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Hershey, I want to thank you for this legislation. And you gave a little bit of the history, I think, making the case of why we need that geographic balance and some of the challenges that are different on the shore. My question is, sometimes you run into people say, you don't want too many people on an accountability board, on some of these boards and commissions, but given that this is the accountability and implementation board, is that where you were comfortable increasing it from 7 to the 11 number?
Thank you, Senator. I mean, we've seen legislation already that have increased the sizes of boards with membership to make sure that all diversities are included in these boards. I would just go back to say that this is one of the most powerful and influential boards in the state of Maryland. And they are accountable to no one, not the General Assembly, not the voters, but nobody. And with that, with them being able to make the decisions on how each county has to implement the blueprint, I think that there should be a broader, more diverse board that would enable them to help make these decisions going forward.
Senator Watson.
Thank you for this bill. Like some of the other folks in Prince George's County, I was concerned that there was no Prince George's County visibility on the Accountability Implementation Board, but it wasn't so much having a Prince George's person there. It was more so having someone who knows the difference between an urban school district and a suburban school district. And when you look at the way the school districts are running, arguably the most challenges are in the urban school districts. But my question is, so if we go by this and implement this bill, does that mean we have to lose some of the folks who are already on the Accountability Implementation Board, who've been trained up and ready to rock and roll?
Senator, the quick answer is no. Again, there are 7 members, and as I had mentioned before, a number of them are from the counties in the central part of the state. So I'd go back to just the first part you stated when you were concerned about suburban schools versus urban schools. You can imagine what legislators from the rural counties thought about this when again our representatives that are just based in urban locations able to comprehend at all what it's like to try to educate individuals out in the rural areas, the challenges that we face through transportation, the challenges that we face through special needs students that are different in much more sparse schooling locations. Mr. Chairman, if you remember, we had a piece of legislation on the floor today that just simply added a student member to the Kent County School Board. And I received a call from a colleague on the floor, and he says, I was reading through the fiscal note and I saw, does Kent County really only have one high school? And I said, yeah, that's true. One high school in the entire county. And we have an AIB board that's going to try to tell this tiny county with less than 2,000 students that this one size fits all piece of blueprint legislation, how it's going to work in Kent County. And Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, but I don't see that happening from some group of 7 individuals that have no experience in rural education and what it's like. And I think, again, as we move forward with the blueprint, it's very important that we have enough representation from the entire state that the people that are making these decisions can glean on their knowledge and ability to educate students all over the state of Maryland. Thank you, Senator.
Okay, any additional questions for the sponsor, Senator Hershey, Vice Chair Kagan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator, I have a couple of quick questions. First off, I do remember our floor debate, and I remember you and others imploring people to apply
That's right.
because there weren't enough applicants. So of the 43, do you know how many were from Kent County? Of the 43 who originally applied, how many of them were qualified, had education policy background?
Madam Chair, I think there is, Vice Chair, I think there is some data on in the fiscal note that talks about the 9 nominees that were selected from 43 applicants. Most of the applicants resided in Montgomery County, 13, and Baltimore City, 16, with other applicants living in Baltimore County, Anne Arundel County, Baltimore County 5, Anne Arundel County 4, Prince George's County 3, Charles County 1, Frederick County 1. So no, there were none, as you can see, none from the Eastern Shore as well, which is really what prompted the Senate President's letter, because his letter was written in September. And that's when there was concern that the nominating committee obviously did not get out the news well enough that they were able to, you might say that, but again, with 43 applicants for 7 positions, of which 9 were selected and the governor narrowed down to 7, 43 applicants in the state of Maryland. I would say that the nominating committee did not do a very good job at all of making individuals, citizens of the state of Maryland, aware of this, aware of the application process for the AIB board.
So anybody who's watching and wants to learn about the very impressive resumes of those who were selected can go to aib.maryland.gov. And there's a list. So first off, let's be clear, it was Governor Hogan who made these selections, correct?
Of the 9 nominees that were provided to him, he narrowed it down to 7.
Yes.
Correct.
Second, we do have a
It was
vacancy,
required to.
as you mentioned, with Fagan Harris now serving as Governor Moore's chief of staff. It seems like that's an opportunity for people from the shore or from Western Maryland to apply to be considered.
Madam Chair, I did try to get that information just recently. I asked a number of sources if they knew how many applicants did apply by the February 24th deadline. I did not get a number. I know that my office, and I believe Senator Carrozza's office as well, made sure that individuals at least on the Eastern Shore, were aware of this process. Now, again, I would say that there was a definite gap that was identified in the with the original list of 9 nominees, as I said, from the Latino Legislative Caucus and the Prince George's County Executive. It would be interesting to see, and again, I would have my predictions, but it would be interesting to see who this next nominee is.
Okay, and I guess the last thing, you said that there's no oversight, and I just want to clarify.
Right.
Do you not believe that we get oversight?
I don't believe that they are accountable to the General Assembly. Again, the only oversight that we have is that they have to go through executive nominations, but I don't see that this board is accountable to either us or the voting public.
Do you not agree that the blueprint legislation created the board?
I do. They did create it.
Okay, so in the same way, hypothetically, this body could also modify or eliminate it.
We certainly can, and I have a piece of legislation that would like to modify it.
Thank you, Senator. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, any additional questions for the sponsor, Senator Hershey? Okay, seeing none, we do have one witness signed up unfavorable, Maddie Long. Is Ms. Long here? If you could come up to the table.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your testimony, Senator Hershey. You got 2 minutes and you signed up unfavorable.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and committee members. My name is Maddie Long, and I'm a policy fellow with Strong Schools Maryland, an organization dedicated to ensuring the full funding and faithful implementation of the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. I'm here today to respectfully oppose Senate Bill 522. Madam Vice Chair kind of stole a lot of my testimony, but on the surface, this bill seems to promote equal representation on the Accountability and Implementation Board. However, when you dive deeper into history, which you all probably know better than me, and existing law, you can see that is both unnecessary and potentially harmful. The law requires that the board must generally consist of 7 individuals who collectively reflect the geographic, racial, ethnic, cultural, and gender diversity of the state and have a high level of knowledge and expertise in various education policy areas. It does not prohibit any candidate from Western Maryland, Southern Maryland, or the Eastern Shore to apply. The fiscal and policy note lays this out simply. In 2021, there were only 43 valid applications to initially fill board positions, only one of which was from Southern Maryland. No one from Western Maryland or the Eastern Shore applied. This bill would add 4 additional members to the AIB, effectively placing value on geographical representation at the cost of potentially less experienced members and a more politically polarizing system of appointment. By opposing this, we are in no way invalidating the importance of voices from these regions. If awareness and accessibility was a factor in 2021, Strong Schools hopes to be a partner with the AIB in the future to promote board vacancies, such as the one that is open right now, and encourage qualified candidates to apply from any region in the state. We have a network of advocates in these regions, and we're sure to promote it to our full extent. And for these reasons, we respectfully urge an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Ms. Long? Okay, seeing none, that concludes bill hearing on Senate Bill 522. We're going to next turn to Senator Reedy, Senate Bill 567. I would note, Senator Reedy, we had a substantially similar bill from Senator Folden earlier today. Senate Bill 750.
I see that. And you know, great minds think somewhat alike. I think his bill is slightly different. I'll be relatively brief, Mr. Chairman, with that knowledge in mind. Some of you have heard this bill before, and I'd like to present, happy to be here to present Senate Bill 567, Senator Justin Reedy for the record, representing District 5. Carroll and a piece of Frederick counties. Senate Bill 567 is common sense legislation that would require voter ID for in-person voting, but expands the type of identification that can be used from sort of the traditional debate about using your driver's license or a state issued photo ID. I still think that's a great way to show your identification, but this legislation actually allows for a whole host of identification at the ballot. So one of the main concerns has always been expressed when we talk about voter ID is there could be individuals who don't possess a government issued ID, it could be expensive. This Senate Bill 567 addresses this by including things like utility bill, bank statement, government check, paycheck, or other government issued documents, including a voter notification card or a sample ballot mailed to the voter by the local board. I've also heard other objections to why voter ID is wrong or bad. Many of those objections, I would say, can be addressed by, well, you have to issue an ID, you have to submit an ID to walk in here. So you have to run through checks to do all kinds of things to submit identification. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. So there's 35 states that request or require ID to vote. And in our one person, one vote system, having intentional but reasonable security measures can instill confidence in the sanctity of our votes and system of government. There have been many cases where people have registered in multiple states and voted in multiple times, like a deceased voter that they'll find has cast a ballot. Or so Senate Bill 567 will give voters the confidence that all who vote do so legally. And Mr. Chairman, I would just respectfully request a favorable vote on Senate Bill 567. And I'm sure Senator Folden also elaborated on some of these issues as well. So I think we could work together to find a nice compromise between those two bills and get that bill out to the floor promptly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, any questions for the sponsor, Senator Reedy? Senator Carozza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Reedy, thank you for this legislation. I'm simply going to ask, why is it you think that people want this safeguard in? as far as showing the ID. And as far as being able to apply multiple ways to prove your identity, do you think that pretty much then neutralizes some of the past opposition to simply showing an ID when you vote?
I think generally it does. To answer your second question, I'm sure someone can tell me some story where there could be somebody who didn't have any of those things. I would question whether that's anybody, but could be somebody perhaps. But I think generally you'd be addressing the major issue. Someone without any of those would have a hard time, I think, getting to the polls at all. So, which is another set of problems. But as far as why people are so passionate about this particular issue, I think it's that when people show up to the polls, a lot of times they're surprised they don't have to show something. They're upset. They're worried somebody could just come and give their name. And look, we don't know that happens a whole lot in Maryland, but there are a lot of people who rarely or ever vote. And, there could be bad actors that come and show up and give somebody's name at a polling place. We used to have everybody voting in different precincts. Now we have a lot more large combo precincts and early voting, and that's fine. But it is more opportunity for, isolated incidents where someone's, doing something they shouldn't. So this isn't it. And also, there's even anecdotal times where someone gives their name, but it's heard wrong by the person. They check off the box and it's the wrong name. So I think this is a great way to just kind of avoid that and make sure everybody can feel comfortable knowing that it's their vote being cast, and that's who's voting on election day.
Okay, any additional questions for the sponsor? Okay, seeing none, we do have 3 witnesses signed up, all favorable. I'll just call them up. Will Zwart, Mr. Zwart here. Jolie McShane and Dana Schultz. So 3 of you can come up. That's the only reason.
Welcome to the committee. You can go in any order. Each of you has up to 2 minutes. Mr. Swart?
I guess I'll go. Well, thank you very much, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Today, I would like to talk to you about Russia and Ukraine. But first, I want to ask you a question. When you walked into the building this morning, did you have to show your ID? The answer, of course, is yes, but why? To show that you have a right to participate in the civil process. Entering a government building is just one of the numerous places that a valid ID is required. I have a list here of 76 such places, and before everybody runs away, no, I'm not going to read the whole thing. There's driving, buying insurance, visiting a doctor's office, buying Medicare, buying a house or cell phone, voting in union elections, applying for food stamps, welfare, social security, section housing, or a visa or green card. These last few are programs specifically designed to help underprivileged groups, especially minorities. How is it not discriminatory for these programs to require ID, but it is for voting? In fact, I've heard several Black Americans take offense at the argument, saying it implies they are too ignorant to get an ID and is therefore racist. This view is reflected in a recent Rasmussen poll, which found that a whopping 73% of Black voters want voter ID, as well as 81% of non-whites and 75% of all Americans. I have another list, nobody leave, of 114 full or partial democratic countries that require ID to both register to vote and to vote. Some of these are Denmark, Canada, Britain, Japan, Israel, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and finally, Ukraine. Russia isn't on the list. Big surprise, they don't want honest elections. But the US isn't on it either. We should not be in the same category as Russia. For that reason, and to support American voters of all races, I urge you to support this bill. Thank you.
Are you an Eagle Scout or on your way to?
I am an Eagle Scout, yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. All right. Not sure which of you want to go next.
Thank you for hosting me today. And for the record, I'm still Dana Schultz, a combat veteran. Election integrity is deeply distrusted, and voter ID will help to alleviate some of the mistrust. The latest Rasmussen poll, over 80%, and the other statistic of the 60% was from a study from Georgia and Tennessee, and I believe the Rasmussen poll is the more current, and it's in my written testimony. Quote, requiring identification at the polling place is a reasonable request to ensure the accuracy and integrity of our elections. Polls continue to show that low voter confidence is nonpartisan and it is not getting any better. This low voter confidence played out in the 2022 general election in Maryland. I submitted testimony showing and links showing high-level statewide Anne Arundel County statistics. 2 points. Republican turnout decreased the least statewide and in the county. Even with the overwhelming mail-in ballots used by Democrats, total Republican turnout exceeded Democrat turnout by several points, further demonstrating the bipartisan distrust of our electoral system. The claim that voter ID suppresses the turnout of minority voters is refuted by academic studies and election results in Georgia and Indiana in 2008 and 2010, and by our previous testimony. So from a Board of Elections perspective, the 2020 turnout statistics were very disappointing. And I included some links. So due to growing nonpartisan distrust in our election system, the identification of numerous apparent voting anomalies in the state of Maryland and the documented issues pertaining to voting nationwide, over 80% of all Americans have lost faith in our elections. To compound very low confidence, we're hearing more voters state they're not going to vote because they believe their vote doesn't matter. So I urge you to require voter ID.
Ms. McShane.
My name is Jolie McShane. I'm a resident of Baltimore County, testifying in favor of Senate Bill 567. I'm an entrepreneur and a small business owner. A recent trip to the American Red Cross to donate blood, a valid driver's license was required. My license had to be fed into a fancy card reader. If I refused to submit my driver's license, I could not donate blood. For those who want to donate plasma to make extra money, but do not have a driver's license, let me ask you, are they being discriminated against? And certainly they are not being treated with equity. I am embarrassed to be from a state that allows voting to take place without voter identification. As an election judge, I cannot tell if someone is lying about their name and their address and birth date. By Maryland standards, a person can purchase voter roll lists and go from voting precinct to voting precinct and be someone different at each place. This is truly not an equitable situation for us voters. Our legislators need to do everything possible to ensure voter confidence in our elections. Prior testimonies have proven that voter identification requirements increase voter turnout. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Ms. McShane. Are there questions for these three witnesses? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. And we have written but no one present who is unfavorable to the bill. That therefore completes the hearing on Senate Bill 567. And we are back with Senator Reedy for Senate Joint Resolution number 1. Michael Riley, Nancy Dahl, Cody Tristan White, Mary Jane Perot. Senator Reedy, you okay with them being brought up now?
That should be fine, yes.
Is that okay?
Yep.
All right, let's bring those up as to join Senator Reedy at the table. There are others. Why don't you all get settled, and then Senator Reedy, you may begin your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair and members of the committee. Again, Senator Justin Reedy for the record, presenting SJ1. And some of you were here last year and heard this bill, but some of you were not. And I'm just to kind of go into it here. It's really important concept and idea that I believe as time has come. That's why we're presenting it. And this resolution is being presented to offer a structural solution to a structural problem. SJ1 offers the chance with the Article 5 Amendments Convention to restore the balance of power in our federal system by using our state legislature constitutional authority under Article 5. The activities we see today in Washington, D.C. that come from the federal government, no matter, by the way, who the president is or which party is in charge of Congress, the actions today that we see would have been unimaginable to the founders of our country. Federal laws and regulations now touch upon every aspect of our daily lives from what kind of light bulbs we can be sold, we can buy, to farming practices, to school regulations, to healthcare. And we also are living, and it's becoming ever more present the longer we go, and particularly as we talk more and more about what's happening in our economy and with banking and other issues that are in the news today. It's becoming very clear we live under a shadow of a crushing national debt that threatens to be a huge problem. Now, I think it's for our children and grandchildren. It used to be, you could say, our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. It's coming ever closer. And this is a bipartisan issue with lots of blame to go around. And I want to credit a lot of the folks here that are going to be speaking or involved with an organization called Convention of States that advocates for this legislation nationwide. They advocate for it in red states and blue states. They've advocated for it when the previous president was president and the current president is president. So they've been very consistent. I only sponsored the bill last year, but something that I've kind of learned a lot about. I believe it's a really unique opportunity. The Supreme Court the past decades has vastly expanded federal power through precedents, frequently with willing accomplices in Congress and the executive branch, and again, in both parties and from all ideological persuasions. We spent a lot of time talking about the Supreme Court on the Senate floor the last few days. And so we can see the power there. Now, the Supreme Court has created loopholes to the Constitution's limit on federal power. And those loopholes will remain there till they get closed. And the someone who can close them is sitting in this room. It's us by design as the elected state legislatures. Our founding fathers predicted this very situation could arise over time. And toward the very end of the Constitutional Convention, George Mason specifically predicted that the federal government would one day overpower the states. It was actually this whole issue was a source of significant debate at that time and in the years that followed. And that's why George Mason insisted that Article 5 include a way for states to propose constitutional amendments through a state-controlled convention. Mason's proposal was adopted, and the final version of Article 5 gave states the ultimate constitutional power to unilaterally amend the Constitution of the United States without the consent of Congress. It's a high bar. The way it works is 2/3 of state legislatures, and that's 34 states, would pass resolutions applying for a convention to propose amendments on the same topic, which serves as the locked agenda for the meeting. And each state can choose and instruct its delegates who attend the meeting and work with others to hammer out amendment proposals on the specific topics that are articulated in the 34 state applications. And because they act as state agents of their legislatures, they'd be called commissioners, only have legal authority to act pursuant to that specified agenda, and every state gets a vote. Any proposals that are supported by a majority of states would then get submitted back to the states for ratification. And as we know, 38 states to ratify a constitutional amendment. So this is a huge undertaking, but it would be the opportunity to see real consensus built on certain issues that could help bring a lot of our warring factions, I think, in our country together. And I think it's actually something we all ought to hope and strive for in the midst of what is a very difficult time politically. I think for all of us we don't like the dissension we see, and we can all take a moment and blame one side or the other. But the truth is, it oftentimes the dissension can go both ways or multiple ways. So by passing this resolution, we would be saying that we believe it's time for states to gather to consider proposing amendments that will rebalance federal power with state power. And specifically what's called for in SJ1 is limited to 3 topics for amendments. One would be an amendment to impose common sense fiscal discipline on the federal government, looking at things like balancing a budget. Amendments that, again, responsibly limits the power and jurisdiction of the federal government in its role, and then amendments that would set term limits for federal officials, including or possibly limited to federal judges and elected officials. So that doesn't mean that the convention would have to propose an amendment on each of these topics, but that would be the lockbox that would be part of this. That's part of this proposal. So my motivation, as I've talked about for the last couple minutes, is I introduced this. I think it's an idea we need to think more about. Number one, we need to really consider doing it. Number two, and we would not be the first state, but there's still a long way to go. But I think it's a really great opportunity for us to put our foot down and say we need to reorder the federal government's hold and priorities, but in a way that is not a drastic change that tries to upend everything that any of us may or may not disagree with. Just some common sense fiscal discipline and term limits. I really want to try to see if we can move past. I'm trying to find ways in a lot of areas in my sort of whatever my political career is, such as it is. How can we move past vitriol and have strong, fierce debate, but do it in a way that's focused on solutions and building solutions, especially if it relates to national politics. It's like every 2 years, there's this high stakes game of elections of who's going to control Congress, who's going to be in the White House. And it's like if your side loses the White House, particularly, everybody wants to, say the world is going to end. And then the other side, says, no, the world, everything's going to be great. The truth is, it's kind of, we have to keep working together. So I'll leave it there and just say that Convention of the States Action Maryland was an all volunteer organization. A number of them are here to testify today. I respectfully ask that you take to heart their testimony and we ask for your support of SJ1. And I'd be happy to answer any questions, or we can wait for the panel. It's up to you.
Okay, let's have some of your panelists speak. You all can go in any order. Just identify yourselves and you have up to 2 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Madam Vice Chair, my name is Michael Riley. I live in Durwood, Maryland in District 19. I'm a PhD scientist who develops advanced computing technologies for climate science. I also volunteer for Convention of States Action as Maryland's state director, representing now more than 30,000 supporters across the state. We're a nonprofit constitutional education organization dedicated to helping Marylanders improve our civic skills and build bridges between constituents and their legislators. We are a diverse group that cares deeply about Maryland and the United States. Our supporters are here to tell you why they believe an Article 5 Convention of States is necessary at this time. Like you, Madam Vice Chair, they're motivated by the problems our fellow citizens face, and they strive for constructive discussions about the way forward. Today, I will focus on the resources we could apply to those problems. Maryland's share of federal spending is over $113 billion, which is about $20 billion more than our state annual budget. How much control do you have over that $113 billion? Is it solving important problems that we face in Maryland? Are we getting the value we deserve? Maryland is home to some of the most highly regarded institutions in the world. We have one of the most educated populations. We Marylanders know best how to apply our citizens' hard-earned resources to the problems that we face here in our state. But to have that discussion, we need to rebalance our relationship with our federal government. An Article 5 Convention of States provides a well-understood, disciplined way for you and your fellow state legislators from across the country to start that discussion. Let's bring those resources back to Maryland so you, our legislators, can work together to make sure those hard-earned resources go where they're needed. Only then can we get fair, equitable, and sustainable solutions that truly meet Maryland's needs. Please pass the resolution out to committee for debate and a vote on the floor. Madam Chair.
Mr. Riley. Ms. Dahl?
Members of the committee, our constitutional republic is in jeopardy. We are letting our federal government take away our freedoms via censorship for one, and under the guise of for the better good. That is how totalitarianism begins. Our federal government and media working together unlawfully are smothering any opposing view, thwarting any debate. China, Eastern Europe, Cuba, and now Brazil. History is giving us all the warning signals, and this one is blaring at us. Our system of controls are being eaten away, disregarded. If we continue on this path, I believe that ultimately the role of the states will be so diminished as to become powerless. It would be naive to believe that we can preserve our freedoms and inalienable rights if we do not take action. You, right now, have the opportunity to use the Constitution to protect the Constitution. Holding a convention of states is a constitutional right, not some concocted notion. If there is any fear or hesitation, it should be outweighed by the degree of what we have to lose. My fear is that this will continually be pushed aside until it's too late. Please vote in favor of this resolution so it can pass to the floor for debate. And I stress the importance of debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dahl. Cody Tristan White, welcome to the committee. You have up to 2 minutes.
My name is Cody White. I am 11 years old and a homeschooled 7th grader from Mechanicsville, Maryland. Power tends to co-opt, and absolute power co-opts absolutely. This phrase came from Lord Acton when he sent a letter to Bishop Creighton in 1887, and the sentiment holds true today. History has shown us that when people stay in power for too long, they become co-opted by it. They forget where they came from and the people who elected them. Based on my research, the longest serving representative to the House served for 59 years. Currently, there are members of Congress who have held their jobs for more than 40 years. Honestly, what regular job could they have had? What could they know about the middle class, the poor? They've not had to work 2 to 3 jobs to make ends meet. They don't have to worry about the price of eggs or how they're going to feed their families. Many members of Congress have been in the government for so long that they are totally disconnected from most of America. How are they representing their constituents if they don't understand them? How can we say we are a representative government if our elected officials don't actually represent the people they serve? When the Prime Minister of New Zealand stepped down a few weeks ago, she said, "I am leaving because with such a privileged role comes responsibility. The responsibility to know when you are the right person to lead and also when you are not." I wish more people in Congress were like her. Term limits are necessary for prosperity. President Eisenhower said, "What is good for the president might very well be good for the Congress," and Americans agreed with him. I believe that representatives will better represent us when we limit how long they can represent us. The founders wanted a truly representative government, so they made it possible for the people to call a convention of states through their states. This is our chance to make this happen. This joint resolution includes a provision to discuss and enact an amendment that would address term limits and solve this problem. Please support SJ1. Thank you very much.
Have you here? And wrapping up this panel, Mary Jane Perot. Welcome.
I'm Mary Jane Perot, Regional Captain, and represent almost 5,000 Convention of States supporters, and thankful for your attention today. Our Article 5 Convention of States resolution is simply calling for National Convention to debate the 3 topics outlined in the application. Citizens across the state are concerned about what's happening in Washington and relieved when they learn that there is a solution. They immediately sign the petition knowing that term limits and fiscal restraints are needed. A recent survey showed that 80% of voters across party lines wanted Congress term limited. Those opposed have said elections are term limits, yet the president can only serve 2 terms. Congress should be term limited as well, but it can only be accomplished through a convention of states. Inflation created by federal overspending lowers our standard of living and creates particular strain on low-income families. In 30 years, 40% of the federal budget will be interest expense on the national debt. Wouldn't it be helpful to have one topic in one bill as we do in Maryland? This helps control costs. The third topic is restraining the federal government to rebalance the power between the states and the federal government. I used to think it was a slippery slope to have a convention of states, but after reading more, I learned that's not possible. The result of the convention is to simply propose amendments constrained by the 3 topics, which also needs to be ratified by 38 states. So we're just asking to have a meeting to discuss these types of solutions. Ask yourself, what do I have to lose by voting for this bill for the first time? You have so much to gain because this is one of the most important legislations of our time. Please approve SJ1. Thank you.
You all kept within your time limit. We appreciate that respect, and we're glad you were here to share your opinions. Next let's see, are there any questions for this panel? Senator Carozza?
Yeah, thank you.
If you all would stay seated for a second.
Thank you,
Senator Carozza.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, and I'll be brief. I'm always interested because the witnesses bring a lot of information about our founding and a reminder of how we were formed as a constitutional republic. My question is, and I think it might have been presented, I wanted to know, do so many states have to pass this joint resolution before we can move to that? And I forget what that magic number might be.
Just like with the Congress, it's a 2/3, so 34 states have to pass this, essentially the same joint resolution. We're currently at 19.
And 38 have to ratify, but
38.
34.
I'm gonna take a moment, because I think it's really important that, that Cody hear this. So a bunch of states years ago passed term limits and a bunch of them have repealed because they're a really bad idea. And they take away, they take away choice from the voters. Because if someone's doing a good job, you don't want them to leave. And so even conservative states like Idaho and Utah have repealed them. So it's a more complicated issue than might, meet the eye. And folks who are not accountable to the voters, like lobbyists or staffers, are not term limited, and they end up making the decisions rather than the accountable voters, the legislators. So I just want to offer that. Isn't that so, Mr. Chairman? With that would complete the questions on this.
Senator Kagan, the good news is the convention simply says it's something you discuss, so you
I
don't have to
understand.
do it.
I understand, but the theme of a lot of the witnesses was term limits, and they say
imagine
it
why.
sounds appealing until people think about it, and then they go, "Oh yeah, I don't want lobbyists and staffers making the decision."
Yeah, we
With
wouldn't want
all
that
due
in Washington.
respect to our lobbyists and staffers, I think elected officials who are accountable makes more sense. With that, thank you all for your testimony. Elwin Redfern, Chengbo Sun, David Hafer, Jacob DeBoer, and Cesare Vitopia is the next panel. And then we'll have 1 or 1.5 more panels after this. You all can go in any order, just identify yourselves, and you have up to 2 minutes to present your testimony. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's my privilege to speak in front of you. My name is Chengbo Sang. I came from China. When I first came to the United States, I was like a bird out of the cage. This land is like the image of heaven to me. But because of where I came from, I recognize that communism is coming here. 3 years ago, the almost forgotten feeling of suffocating suddenly struck me hard when we were instructed what we could say and how we should think. I was told freedom of speech was protected here, but somehow so much censorship. And so many decisions are made by Washington, D.C. instead of our state. I'm hyper alert of freedoms suddenly disappearing. My friends who grew up here seems didn't realize this is a big deal. My friends, they ask, what does it have to do with me? Well, I have many examples of things happening right here that frighten me, and I perhaps should frighten you as well. Freedom of speech used to be the greatest freedom, but now so much, and so many things are fact-checked. A fact-check department, that sounds like a Soviet Union Ministry of Truth, but whose truth is that truth? I love this country. When I look around the world, I see that our country is the last land of peace and freedom. Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sun. Next witness? Yes.
My name is Cantor Elwin Redfern from Silver Spring, and I have lived in Maryland for 32 years and a second-generation American. I'm a professional cantor and have been a prayer leader in traditional Jewish synagogues in Annapolis, Baltimore, and Delaware. I am here today as part of the Convention of States to ask you respectfully and humbly to approve our SJ1 resolution today. We just want the resolution discussed and debated for the first time in the Senate during this year's legislative session. I've supported Convention of States because for at least 10 years now, I feel there is too much federal authority in every person's daily life in America. As an election judge in Montgomery County for 20 years, I've been very interested in our county government and legislative matters in Annapolis. President Abraham Lincoln said, "Government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." I'm not sure that our federal government wants this anymore. The federal government is taking away your power as a state government, and this is alarming to me. There are now 19 states that have already approved the Convention of States. 33 states have passed the COS resolution, including the state of Massachusetts. Four more states are closing to passing this week. If the Maryland legislature passes the Convention of States resolution entirely and becomes a supporter, Maryland will have more freedom and liberty to run our state as President Lincoln asked, because they will be participating in helping making the choices now made at the federal level related to budgeting, the scope of the federal government, and how long legislators serve the states, all through this convention. Maryland should have a loud voice as a leader in this convention.
For Redford. Next, please.
Hi, I'm Jacob DeBoer. I'm in 7th grade, and I currently live in California, Maryland. Confusing, right? Most people know what term limits are, but not many people know the true value of them and how they are formed and implemented. Term limits were first introduced to the government on February 27th, 1951 via the 22nd Amendment. This prevented people after Franklin Roosevelt from serving more than 2 terms in a row as president. Term limits are crucial to governmental structure as it prevents presidents from making self-interested decisions to retain power, an oppressive and almost dictatorial government from forming, and a leader from becoming corrupt and power-hungry. This nuance of human nature is not just limited to our commander-in-chief. In the present, most elected government officials are allowed to serve an unlimited number of terms, which leaves them susceptible to the same self-interests and may be the reason that we've surpassed our debt ceiling by trillions. For instance, our public officials could be coerced through bribes or risks of election into supporting laws that a vocal and connected group of people demand, even if, in their opinion, those laws aren't the best for the country as a whole. When elected officials are more heavily influenced by wealthy donors and connected individuals than their own constituents, then they represent special interests rather than people who are working multiple jobs just to make ends meet. Additionally, self-interested politicians taking up the limited seats of government prevent new and innovative ideas from forming. This leads us to the point where officials push the status quo for the special interest groups, mocking the design of our representative government. Term limits minimize the amount politicians would be susceptible to lobbyists and their financial influence and establish safety buffers against negative consequences for the country. They would also allow for new people to be involved and overall improve our society for our citizens. Thankfully, our founding fathers designed the Constitution to allow for checks and balances. Article 5 is one of these. By calling a convention of states, we can place term limits on those who need it most, the congressional body who are biased to special interests rather than those who elected them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next witness, please.
My name is Cesare Bodapi and I live in District 13. Our country will turn 247 years old this year. That's just a little over 4 of my lifetimes. This is still a young country. It is an experiment in self-governance. Because of the growing size and depth of the federal government, I fear we may be in the late stages of an unsuccessful experiment rather than the early stages of a successful one. As a civil libertarian, the unconstitutional overreach of the federal government scares me. As a fiscal conservative, the reckless spending scares me. Finally, it scares me to see the federal government unconstitutionally usurping powers that belong to the states. Our founders gave us Article 5 as a way to bypass the Congress to amend the Constitution because they knew there would probably come a time when the people would need to constrain the federal government. The 3 items in this resolution to be discussed at a national convention provide a framework for constraint. I worry about what the future holds for my children and grandchildren and how the dysfunction in Washington is going to affect them. It is my hope that members of this committee vote favorable on this joint resolution so it can be debated on the Senate floor and so future generations do not have to live through the demise of this republic and witness the failure of the American experiment in self-governance. The threats we face because of our runaway federal government apply equally to all, whether they lean left or to the right. This deserves debate and serious consideration. A convention of states to propose amendments to the U.S. Constitution will provide we the people the ability to constrain the federal government. Please support passing SJ1 to the floor for debate so the full Senate has the opportunity to vote up or down on this joint resolution And so the Maryland legislature might join other states to utilize the Article 5 tool our founders gave us to ensure the American experiment in self-government is a success. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm thinking you are Mr. Hafer.
That is me.
Okay, welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Dave Hafer, and I am the District 29 Captain for the Convention of States. I represent approximately 1,700 Convention of States supporters. For more than 35 years, I served as both a Marine and a civilian in the federal government. I have extensive experience with the Department of Defense, the Department of State, and the intelligence community. I've long been concerned over how the federal government spends the taxpayers' money. It always seems that when budgeting, we look to spend more so we can get more. As a manager, I would look for ways to spend the taxpayers' money wisely. My proposals to cut funds, programs, and positions typically fell on deaf ears. The usual refrain was, what if we need these in the future? Spending more to get more. Every year we were given end of the year money, so we would be directed to take unnecessary overseas trips for unnecessary purposes to unnecessary locations. This is just one of the many examples of wasteful federal spending I witnessed during my long career. Over time, it became clear to me that the federal government will not restrain itself. Now the federal debt is over $31 trillion. The federal government has spent and grown far beyond what our founders had ever intended. They would be astounded and dismayed at the size and scope of the federal government today. However, in their incredible wisdom and foresight, they anticipated that this could happen. They left an escape clause. It is called Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution, a Convention of States. Please help us put an end to excessive spending. Americans don't want it and can't afford it. The Convention of States will allow participants to discuss ways to address overspending and debt, which requires discussion by all states. Please support Resolution SJ1 so it can proceed to the House and Senate floor for debate, so Maryland will have a voice in this process. Thank you.
Are there questions for these panelists? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next up, could we have Yun Cheng Smith, Paul Macri, Robert Betts, James McQueen, and Seth Lipko. You may come and take your seats. And you can begin your testimony in any order. You each have up to 2 minutes. Okay, you may begin. Any of you may start. We have a lot of work to do today. Go ahead.
All right, I'll go ahead.
Thank you.
You'll hear me good? My name is Seth Lipko. I live in District 32. I represent just over 4,000 Convention of State supporters in Anne Arundel County. And I'm testifying in support of this application for a Convention of States to propose new constitutional amendments. And the reason for my support is simple. I want my children to inherit a better world than I did. And shouldn't that be what we're all striving for? I mean, I'd imagine that's probably why all of you are in office today. And it's really each one of our duties to, whether we have children or not, to try to move our society in a positive direction and bring about positive change in our future. And I just want to take a quick second here to thank all of you for doing that here. I just see that our federal government's failing to do this. They're enslaving my children to debt from their frivolous spending. They're ignoring their constitutional responsibilities and taking on responsibilities that should be left to you, our state government. I feel like it might be a different story if they perform those duties well, but almost everywhere that they interject themselves, they just spread themselves thinner, they're less effective, and they end up leaving my children the bill. And they've done this without the approval of us, the American people. And honestly, you are our only hope for stopping this trend. I'm not being represented in DC, but I hope that I'm represented here. And that's why I ask that this committee takes this resolution to the floor for a vote and support its full passage. You can end the lifelong residencies in Congress, allowing new public servants to enter with new ideas to solve our nation's problems. You can put a stop to the overreach of power, restoring balance to our federalist system. And you can put a stop to the overspending, bringing responsibility back to our country. And I see this as the best way to improve our way of life for us and for future generations. So please pass this joint resolution to the floor for debate. Thank you.
For your thoughtful testimony. We appreciate the respect. Yes, welcome.
My name is Yunmen Cheng. I'm a first-generation immigrant from Hong Kong. I came to the United States 24 years ago, left everything I knew to escape from communism, where our central government controlled how many children we could have. There today, censorship has been extended not only to media, but also all internet activities are monitored and social credit score in place. I came to the United States to be free of those realities. Our government system is the best in the world. When it operates in accordance with the constitutions, we have strayed from that. For years, our federal government has placed regulatory burdens upon businesses, rules upon rules to restrict commerce and freedom of speech. These are very familiar things to me, and my family does not want that to happen here, but we cannot stop it without your help. Federal agencies are not elected by the people. However, they are able to collect and spend people's money to play favoritism on projects that only benefit their donors. You know what's the best for Marylanders, better than officials in DC. I hope I can count on you, making sure that the federal government would not get bigger. I'm worried that if you don't, Americans will live like where I came from, overreaching central government controlled by a few hundred representatives, collect huge amount of taxes from citizens, but distribute very little to provinces that need it most, and too much involvement in our personal lives. It will hurt everyone, particularly state governments, because they will no longer have much control. Please keep this from happening. You do not want to know how bad it feels to live under those conditions. Neither do I want to go back to it. Therefore, I'm here to ask you to support SJ1. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Paul Macri, and I'm a retired Navy commander and an engineer. As a state grassroots coordinator, I represent over 30,000 supporters for Maryland and Convention of States, and I'm a strong supporter of the joint resolution. The resolution before you proposes a convention to discuss three issues: fiscal restraints, federal term limits, and federal overreach. And let me explain how I believe that this resolution will affect those three to save our constitutional republic that we some call a democracy. First, without fiscal restraints, our children and grandchildren will be crushed by a multi-trillion-dollar debt due to excessive federal spending. You and I balance our family budget, as does the state of Maryland. We need to cut federal spending and return to spending decisions to the states. Second is the term limits on Congress and federal officials. And to be clear, we don't want term limits on you in Maryland. We like and need your voice. We want term limits on those in Washington, D.C. That will also make it easier for you to go to Washington, D.C. The third and final issue I want to discuss at the convention is the federal overreach. In the Navy, we call this mission creep. We need to return the original limits on federal power and jurisdiction. The Constitution lists the few, the only federal responsibilities. Anything and everything else resides in the states like 50 little laboratories. We have to end the one-size-fits-all approach. The few federal powers should be executed only in Washington, D.C. The many state powers will be applied locally. As the saying goes, all politics are local. The three topics work together to bring decision-making back home along with the associated funds. When the power is returned, we'll be back in balance. I trust you to better execute the power and budget and funds once those powers are returned to you, better than it would be in Washington, D.C. We enjoy a supermajority in a nonpartisan way, and thank you for your attention.
Next witness, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Bob Betts. I live in District 9A along with 800 other Marylander voters who want you to call for an Article 5 conventions. Those 800 voters and I have one message for you today. Please send SJ1 to the full Senate for a discussion, debate, and vote. In my testimony today, I wanted to expose the disinformation behind the most common objections to our resolution. You've probably heard them already and are likely to hear them again. So I want you to be prepared to understand them when you do hear them. First is the claim that a constitutional convention could destroy the entire US government and should be avoided at all costs. That's true. All of us supporting SJ1 today oppose a constitutional convention. SJ1 seeks an amendments convention, not a constitutional convention. The two are as different as Joe Biden and Donald Trump. A simple reading of Article 5 makes that clear. Second is the claim that there is no precedent for a convention of states. In fact, conventions of states were common when our country was founded. They are simply a meeting between any number of states to talk about something and maybe make a couple decisions. The most recent one was held in the 1990s to discuss water rights among several southwestern states. They didn't call it a convention of states, but that's what it was. And our resolution seeks to hold another one. Third is the claim that a convention of states would operate without rules, could not be controlled, and would allow corporate donors, lobbyists, and other undesirables to rewrite the Constitution and destroy our civil liberties. Again, a simple reading of Article 5 makes it clear that the only power this convention of states will have is to propose, not adopt, amendments to the Constitution. And I'll say just one more thing in closing. The objections I've heard and that will likely be submitted to this committee are the product of people who haven't either haven't read Article 5, read it but don't understand it, or who understand what our resolution means and will say anything to retain power they hold over us by changing nothing.
Thank you, Mr. Betts. And Mr. McQueen?
Yeah. Good afternoon. My name is James McQueen. I'm a native Marylander. And I learned something today walking through around here. And I'm going to read to you a picture of something hanging on the wall next door. The Civil Rights Amendments. The founding fathers knew the United States Constitution was an imperfect document and thus allowed for corrections to be made in place in future times when society would accept the inalienable rights of the United States citizen. Article 5 of the United States Constitution outlines the process of amending the Constitution. And it talks about that. And what we're talking about here in Article 5 and what amendments that they had made in the Constitution was the first one was 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery. The 14th Amendment, all natural born citizens of the United States, and it goes on further into jurisdiction and what their rights are. The 15th Amendment, all citizens have the right to vote. The 19th Amendment, women have the right to vote. And the 24th Amendment, there will be no poll or property tax required to vote. Once again, this is perfect examples of using the Constitution to fix the Constitution, add other amendments that go with the civil rights amendments that we needed in this country at the time. But this started out at 1865, 68, 1870, 1920, and of course, 1964, the year of the Civil Rights Law. Thank you for your time and for listening.
You being here, are there questions for this panel? Seeing none, we thank you for your testimony and for participating in democracy here in Annapolis. We have two more witnesses, and that'll wrap up this bill hearing. That's Elliot Weekly and a return of Will Zwart. You may go in any order and you have up to 2 minutes. Welcome.
Hello, I am Elliot Weekly. I am in 7th grade and live in Hollywood, Maryland. This is my second time testifying before you all, and I am happy to be here, exercising my right to be heard as a citizen of the United States. Last year, I wrote my testimony and delivered it here, where I discussed learning about the role of federalism in our government and how important it is to have a division of power between branches as well as levels of government. I learned about the power of my voice and the need for citizens to be actively involved in working with legislators. I talked about things have gone off track, but that our founding fathers wrote a Hail Mary buried in Article 5, allowing for the states to reign in the federal government. This is the Convention of States. Now, I know discussing the founders isn't the most popular thing to do this day and age, but I would argue that every single person in this room lives the life they live because of those 55 men, especially the 39 who signed our Constitution. Every citizen in this great nation, regardless of who they are, has a say in how things go. We're represented by you, represented in what should be your role as servant leaders. I was disappointed last year and confused about how you could hear something like this and not try to understand it better. I was frustrated when the committee didn't even vote on the resolution. More than 30,000 of your constituents have very plainly asked for you to consider this, and as representatives, it is your duty to deliberate and then say whether or not you will pass this to the floor. My ask is simple this year. Please vote on the resolution in committee so we know whether or not you, as our elected officials, are interested in actually representing us. Thank you.
Will.
Well, good afternoon, Chairman Fellman and committee members. My name is Will Zort. I have returned. And I'm speaking in favor of this resolution, not only for myself, but for the 1,400 petition signers I represent as a district captain. Honestly, I never thought I'd get the chance to testify for anything, let alone for something as widespread as COS. I mean, this exact same resolution has been debated and discussed by every state in the country, except Connecticut. I guess they missed the memo, but everywhere else, thousands of citizens and legislators have testified for this resolution, just as I am now. And to someone of my generation, that's a pretty rare opportunity. Before I discovered Convention of States, I felt like a lot of young people do, where Washington, D.C. just seemed very indifferent. I think most Americans feel that way, but with younger people, it's especially strong because when Congress debates a bill, to them, it's just a bill, yay or nay. But to us, that's our future. We'll have to try and pay for that $30 trillion debt. I want to start a family someday, but I'll have to do so under hyperinflation and a crippled economy. Those kinds of decisions should be made by the people they affect. And my generation just feels like we have no voice, no control over our own future, which seems pretty bleak at that. That's why so many young people feel discouraged and hopeless, but that's also why this resolution is so great, because it shows my generation that we can actually be involved in the system and make an impact. Fiscal restraints allow us to build our wealth and lives. Term limits open up seats for us to actually be in the system, and overreach limits prevent the federal government from just voting away our futures. Every American should have control of their life, and in the same way that the Emancipation Proclamation gave thousands of slaves control of their lives, this resolution gives thousands of Americans, millions of Americans, that same control today. This resolution will save my future. It is my future. Please support it and bring it to this committee. Thank you.
Are questions for either of these young advocates? Seeing none, that completes this panel and that completes the hearing on Senate. Oh, wait, hold on. One. I see nothing on this. Sorry, hold on. Oh, it's not highlighted. Okay. Okay, not highlighted. Okay, sorry. Michael Ferris, I'm wrong. So you guys are done. Thank you. Michael Ferris and then Jennifer Brown are with us to testify virtually. Ms. Brown, welcome. You have up to 2 minutes and this is favorable testimony.
My name is Jennifer Brown. I hold a master's degree from Johns Hopkins in government with a focus in law and justice. I'm a political science instructor and a Convention of States supporter. Last year, I testified about students in college. This year, I'd like to address some concerns that people typically raise when talking about a convention. Some note that the Convention of 1787 was runaway. However, that was not an accurate depiction of the constitutional framework of the United States at the time. The 1777 Articles of Confederation created an entirely different structure of government than we have now. Each state retained sovereignty, freedom, independence, and every power, jurisdiction, and right, not directly addressed by the Articles. And furthermore, they entered into a firm league of friendship, which operated much like a treaty amongst states rather than a unitary government. In 1786, the states recognized shortcomings of the Articles and independently sent delegates to the Federal Convention to render the federal constitution adequate to the exigencies of government and the preservation of the Union. Thus, the goal of the Constitutional Convention was to rewrite the Constitution as a long-term stable government, not simply propose amendments to an already faltering system. The Article 5 Convention proposed by SJ1 is fundamentally different. It limits delegates to consider only those things that you've heard today, and it does not allow them to consider outside of that scope. Maryland's unwillingness to consider an amendments convention at the federal level is fundamentally opposed to our own constitutional philosophy. In Maryland, as well as in 18 other states, citizens must periodically vote on whether or not there'll be a state constitutional convention. So I asked the members of this committee to consider our own political culture as a smaller state. but always as a key player in national policy. Please vote favorable to SJ1. Thank you.
Ferris, you will be our last witness,
I think he's not.
but he's not here.
He's dropped out, so yeah.
Okay, all right. So we didn't get to hear from Michael Ferris. Are there questions for Ms. Brown? Seeing none. Okay, again, that completes the hearing on Senate Joint Resolution 1. Thank you, Senator Reedy. Back to the chair.
Okay, guys, so